Hello, Hegelian scholars and saints. Get your bagel and jam or coffee, OJ, matcha, whatever it may be. It is a sunny, actually early evening here when I am doing this. So maybe I should go outside, but I would rather be here with you and talk about some dystopian literature, which does actually have context in political philosophy. For instance, Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism. I mean, even, the work of Marx, who thought his current era, his current time was a bit dystopic because, he had his whole idea of what life could be, and he wanted people to rise up. So Orwell and Huxley both were aware of this. One of the main characters of Huxley's book is even called Bernard Marx, and then in Orwell's book 1984, there are different classes of people: the inner party, the outer party, and the proles, which reminds me of the word proletariat. So I think that both George Orwell and Huxley were cognizant of the political philosophy that was out there. But we're just going to be talking about literature and basically comparing these two dystopias. I think probably more people have read 1984. It was published in 1948, or at least written in 1948 and published in 1949. So basically the year was chosen just by inverting the last two digits of the year, and that's when it was set. Huxley's Brave New World was actually written and published earlier. It was published in 1932, but it is set in the year 2540, so we're not there yet. And that dystopia, that world, that governmental regime had its whole dating system. They kind of started a new dating system or era when sort of the colonization happened. And so it is set as well in the year 632 AF, in the year of Ford. So Orwell actually sent his book when it was published to Huxley, and Huxley wrote him back a letter, which is published in my copy of Brave New World. And he basically said, yes, I think your dystopia is going to happen, but I think it's going to disintegrate into my dystopia. So what's the difference between the two dystopias, and which would you rather live in? So the main character of 1984 is Winston Smith. He basically lives in this world that is high in surveillance. It's a dirty, impoverished world where there's rationing, where everything kind of tastes bad. You can't really talk to people. People are suspicious. The thought police are everywhere. Your neighbor can rat you out if you are not displaying the enthusiasm for the government that the government wants you to display. And everything is basically, this is a world filled with gaslighting, revisionist history, censorship, and isolation, basically. So the government not only wants to control what you do, but what you think. And so it's hard when you can't talk to people about, you can't understand, you don't know who's on your side and who is against sort of this power. And everything is a ruse as well. Like there are these three major powers, and they all kind of collaborate and talk about, who's going to be in war with whom, what's the propaganda that's going to be displayed to the citizens, who's going to trade people for slaves. And but there's not really, but the whole point of war, it's like they want the war. The people of power and privilege want the war because that's a way to, use goods and to keep people in poverty, keep people oppressed. So it's not a good place to live in at all. There are no books to read. Really, you can't even write in a journal. There's no privacy. There is, of course, Big Brother, right? And so the fun thing about, fun in quotes, right? No, but it is fun. I mean, 1984 is, in my opinion, and in many people's opinions, the better written book. I don't know if it's grammatically correct, but it's just higher quality and it's timeless. It's very timeless. You can read 1984 and think that it is happening today, or it could happen. And 1984 is getting thrown around quite a bit. And if you see people commenting on social media about like, oh, that's good news speak, or that's double think, or 2 + 2 is 5, or Ministry of Truth, that all comes from 1984. And it's just very easy to see some of the parallels, I would say. So basically, Winston works in the Ministry of Truth, which is involved in changing history based on what the powers that be need. So if the powers that be promised something or said, you will get a certain amount of chocolate next week, but it didn't happen, they would go back to last week's promise and change it to, so it would seem that the powers that be know what they're saying and that they're never wrong. And there's also, in this dystopia, violence and abuse. So they try first to, construct a world where you're always confused, where, like I said, you're isolated, so you don't know who is your ally. So it's really hard to sort of find allies and figure out what to do and feel sane and certain, because they want you to constantly feel confused and like you're crazy and you can't trust your own memories. So they have a slogan. They have 3 slogans, basically. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. So it's basically like if we were to say today that, I don't know, mistrust is faith, and trying to think of it, solidarity is independence, or something like that. It just tries to trip you up and make you feel as if something is not what it seems. And so there's manipulation, there's fear, there's mass groupthink and self-policing. And there's also, along with isolation, that extends to romantic and sexual relationships. They just want to disintegrate the ideas of religion, God, and family, probably because they just don't want any raising of consciousness. So it really is, and at the end of both dystopias, actually, the main characters get beaten down. Winston Smith is sort of found out, you can't trust, and he thought he could trust someone named O'Brien that I think maybe lived in his building, but that doesn't even sound right. But just this guy that he saw around and kind of saw a glimmer of rebellion or something like that. And, it's true. It's like it wouldn't be great to live in a world where it's not safe to say certain things. even worse, it's not safe to say the truth. Like, if there's some actual scientific data in peer-reviewed academic research that says one thing, but the dominant narrative is mandating another thing, you start to ask, well, am I crazy? Like, maybe I haven't seen all the research. I mean, I'm looking at it. This is what the scientists, this is what the academics, the PhDs are saying, but it doesn't seem like this is being followed. And so, it starts to make you feel like, am I the only one? I mean, that's in a way hard to do now because we have social media and, you can find your people, even if you are kind of isolated through, let's just talk about the pandemic, even if you're isolated through lockdowns, or if you don't necessarily feel like coming out with your true beliefs, with your colleagues or friends or family, etc., you can find, in the comment section of YouTube and Twitter, etc., people who kind of have also those fringe ideas that go against the dominant narrative. The only problem is when those social media companies start to censor, start to flag accounts and suspend accounts, and that has happened. All in the message of, we have to protect people from misinformation. But whenever you're talking about censorship, whenever looking at censorship in history, it's important to ask who's doing the censorship, and to ask, to what extent does censorship start to harm instead of help? Can we not, as adults, decide whether, information is true or not, or worth a thought? Do we need a parental authoritarian government or institution protecting us? Sometimes maybe actual scientific information is labeled as misinformation. And that's kind of what's going on here in a sense. Although I'm not sure if I remember any sort of ideology of protection. I mean, I know there's Big Brother and there's surveillance, but it's more just a coercive kind of culture. So I don't know, but Winston Smith, he has a secret relationship with Julia, who is younger, I think like 12 years younger than him, and is a rebel in her own right, but Winston and Julia don't really understand each other quite perfectly, because they are of different generations in a sense, almost, because Winston can sort of remember what life was like before, whereas Julia, she can't. Sorry, allergy season, even though I haven't stepped outside, but I want to anyway. But their relationship is really interesting. It's really interesting that there's a little bit of romance in the book. And anyway, he is deceived. Who he thought was a friend, it wasn't a friend. He doesn't really have a friend, except Julia wasn't trying to manipulate him. Julia was a real friend. But they got separated, and then Winston, because he got tagged as, having thought crimes, he was taken to, the Ministry of Love, which is really the Ministry of Hate and Abuse. And he's basically tortured, and it's, I don't think it's really easy to read, because it's physical violence that's happening, and psychological torture as well, but mixed with the physical pain. And he's just kind of destroyed, he's emaciated, he's starved, his teeth have been pulled out, his nose has been broken, his he looks like he's aged in the course of however long he's in there, maybe months. And then when he comes out, he's completely broken, because they say that basically, we want every last part of you. If we kill you, we want your last dying wish to be love for Big Brother. So it's like they want everything. And I think, you have to ask why. Why would someone want that? Why would people in power want to manipulate and control? And I think it's two things. I think that when you get some narcissistic personalities, some psychopathic personalities, you have to know that the joy that they're getting out of it, or the rise that they're getting out of it, is just the glory of power, you know, the jouissance of, you know, control. And when people are cruel, it's wrapped up in their sort of the joy of being in power over. The second thing is that I think that, you know, manipulation and brainwashing happens on all levels. And if you get swept, if you're one of the people who is rising to power or in power, and you kind of get swept away and have total faith in the narrative that's being sold to you, it can kind of rock your world if you don't want to find out the truth or think something different. You want to do everything you can to, you know, embed that belief further and further, because otherwise, you know, you will show your weakness. You've been lied to. You've been a fool. You've been, you know, you weren't smart enough to see through it. So you're going to try to defend your belief to the bitter end. So I think those two things are happening. So I don't think I mentioned the wars between the three powers, or Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia. I don't know how important that is. And doublethink is the capacity to accept contrary opinions or beliefs at the same time, you know, as a result of sort of political, like, need, I guess. And, you know, I think the most interesting things for me in 1984, I thought that maybe like the 35 pages kind of toward the second half, that where Winston was up in his room that he was renting above an antique shop, which is where he was still being spied upon, and he read this book that O'Brien gave him that was supposed to be like the material of the rebellion, but really wasn't, because no one was really on his side. I thought that was a bit of a drag, but you had something that was similar, but I thought just more well done, about language. Like, there's an appendix at the end that basically talks about how, you know, they rewrote different novels, and they took words out, and they changed things, and they completely abandoned, you know, like Shakespeare, and I don't know if it's exactly Shakespeare, but you know, different authors, and they just try to, you know, newspeak is basically the kind of language that is contrasted with the old speak, which is filled with nuances. There's a thesaurus where, you know, you have different words that carry different weight and different nuances, as I said. They want to diminish the language in order to diminish the range of thought. So it says on page 300 of mine, Newspeak was founded on the English language as we now know it, though many Newspeak sentences, even when not containing newly created words, would be barely intelligible to an English speaker of our own day. It says that Newspeak words were divided into 3 distinct classes. So there's A vocabulary, B vocabulary, and C vocabulary. And it says basically that for A vocabulary, it's the words needed for the business of everyday life. But it just says that while their meanings were far more rigidly defined, in comparison with the present-day English vocabulary, their number was extremely small and their meanings more rigidly defined. All ambiguities and shades of meaning had been purged out of them. It would have been quite impossible to use the A vocabulary for literary purposes or for political or philosophical discussion. So, and they kind of changed, they reduced the grammar as well. Like the word thought did not exist in Newspeak, which kind of doesn't make sense because there's the thought police and the thought crime. But it says its place was taken by think, which did duty for both noun and verb. So it just says that, one is always going to be, either the verb or the noun will be repressed. So B vocabulary consists of words which had been deliberately constructed for political purposes. So they are intended to impose a desirable mental attitude on the person using them. And they're also a kind of a verbal shorthand. So for instance, there's compound words such as good think. So instead of orthodoxy, good think, good thinking, good think wise, and so it reminds me a little bit of like slang as well. And it says words which once had borne a heretical meaning were sometimes retained for the sake of convenience, but only with the undesirable meanings purged out of them. So countless other words such as honor, justice, morality, internationalism, democracy, science, and religion has simply ceased to exist. And we can ask ourselves, how possible is life or the world or ways of being if you don't have the words to express it? And in Newspeak, it was seldom possible to follow a heretical thought further than the perception that it was heretical. Beyond that point, the necessary words were non-existent. So it says no word in the B vocabulary was ideologically neutral. So I think another example is like unfreedom. But it says the stress for words like good think, sex crime, joy camp, in sock, belly fill, think pull. The stress distributed equally, though, between the first syllable and the last. The use of them encouraged a gabbling style of speech, at once staccato and monotonous. And you kind of think about how words are being chopped up today in social media, with slang and just how people are speaking. Are we reducing our own ability to speak and be literary? So the last one, C vocabulary, was supplementary to the others and consisted entirely of scientific and technical terms. So very few of the C words had any currency either in everyday speech or in political speech. So, and there was no word for science. It says in 1984, when Old Speak was still the normal means of communication, the danger theoretically existed that in using Newspeak words, one might remember their original meanings. So anyway, it's like by changing the language, we can change people's thoughts. All right, so when we come back, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we will discuss Brave New World, but my conclusion for 1984 is it is definitely not a dystopia I want to live in. It seems, like you have to be really paranoid and everything is dirty and gross and impoverished and you're alone and isolated. And also, Winston gives in after he's beat and let out into the world. He is no threat because his mind has been completely brainwashed. So it's not like a super optimistic ending. Hello, we are back. And so now we're going to talk about Huxley, which I probably have a bit less to say on. I will just tell you right up front, though, that I think that I would much rather live in Brave New World just because ignorance is bliss. there's little mental distress. You are being completely controlled, but for the most part, you don't know that you are. So, and also, there's no violence, there's no abuse, there's no pain, there's also no sickness. It's a very clean world. It's sterile, but, it's described in a way where there's no or little disease, there's no bugs, there's nothing annoying. Not everyone has a good life, but also it's a bit misleading as well, because for Huxley, he writes there are classes of people as well, like there are in 1984, but there are it's a more complicated, or I guess a more varied kind of hierarchy. There's more levels, I guess I should just say simply. And the book comes from the perspective of the elite or the privileged. So, you don't really get to know the feelings of the people that are less than an alpha. So, but there are, of course, people who, struggle with their conscience and have consciousness, and basically because there's an uncolonized part of the world that people under the new regime, they will go for a vacation or kind of like a tour, to kind of see the quote-unquote savages, because they have left sort of a part of the world civilization untouched. And they all fly around in, I guess, these helicopters or these mini planes. So it just reminded me of the Jetsons. And I just have to say that the reason that I don't think Huxley is as timeless, and I think it's kind of poorly written, is because the first, I don't even know, maybe 50 pages, although it felt much longer than that, the first 3 chapters, I think, was basically like watching a science fiction movie from the 1950s that uses like Jell-O is blood and tin hats on aliens, and like coats their monsters in like green carpet or felt or something like that. Like it's almost kind of comical, but it's also a bit exhausting, because basically the book starts out with the director of the factory, because in this dystopia humans are bred. No one has sex for childbearing reasons. They have found a way to take just a small amount of human material and genetics and breed like 87 sort of offspring from it. And they do things, and they're like kept in bottles, these embryos, and they like add ingredients to the bottles to either basically to impair their cognitive ability or their physical ability or their physical appearance, and so to condition them to feel like normal in certain circumstances. Like for instance, if you want to breed a generation of, I don't know, workers to work in the mines or near toxic chemicals, then you're going to condition them to not be disgusted or not fear those chemicals or those like dangerous situations, the cave situations. You're going to condition them to feel the most comfortable in them. So they will love and covet their given forced jobs and careers. And so for the alphas, I guess they just made them, allowed them to kind of grow and flourish as they would, maybe there's a lot of talk about vitamins like magnesium and vitamin D in here. So basically the first 50 pages is the director like showing to various like, I guess, graduate intern alphas, how it works. And this is what, the whole world is. It's just, except for, the uncolonized parts that they decided to leave alone, I guess, for, I don't know, I forget the reason. But they, it's fine. They go to tour and everything. So the main characters, in a sense, there's not really a character that you kind of latch onto, I don't think, in this book, which is another criticism of it. But you have Bernard Marx, who is an alpha, but, he doesn't feel quite like he fits in. And he does kind of get banished, but when you get banished from this place, you get to like choose I guess if you're an alpha, you get to choose an island you want to live on. So I don't know, it doesn't seem like there's a real punishment for the alphas, at least. And if you're not an alpha, you don't have the mental capacity to rebel. So there's no need for punishment in that sense. But anyway, if they do punish you, there's just this thing called soma, which I guess can be like, it's like a happy sedative that can be in candy or on ice cream or syrup or a drink or something like that. And so, or even a powder, like the police like spray people with soma and they just become like subdued and happy. And people love it. Like they get their soma rations and that's their time to just chill and like be, I don't know, like in a happy place. So there's also a girl who is a part of the story, Lenina Crown, and she kind of likes Bernard Marx, and she ends up liking the other character, John the Savage, as well. But she does not have, she's an alpha, I think, but she's just kind of, I don't know, not that smart, I suppose. So there's no interiority that's super compelling, but she's, kind of a fun, ditzy character, I guess. So, I don't know. Huxley's Brave New World might really work on, in musical theater. I don't think George Orwell's would, because it's too depressing. So, anyway, so there's, like I said, there's the Savage Reservation, which I think Lenina and Bernard go to, and they find out that there's a person on this Savage Reservation, which is basically the people are allowed to age. So in the colonized world, once you become 60, you still look very fresh and beautiful and are healthy, but you are kind of like sent to die, which again, like, also doesn't seem bad. Anyway, so they go to this place, and John the Savage is the child of the director's ex-girlfriend, who got accidentally left in the Savage Reservation when she and the director of the factory were touring the Savage Reservation. So John feels like an outcast because he doesn't look like, he has like different genetic material, because he's basically the son of alpha parents. And he just wants to go back, and Lenina kind of falls in love with him. But John never acclimates to the colonized place. He loves literature. And again, in this dystopia, it's a common thing for dystopias that, there's going to be censorship and you don't get to enjoy reading, because basically no one wants you, the government doesn't want you to think for yourself. So buy all the books you can before they get changed and taken away, I guess. And the same with even the, Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale, right? Like, the women couldn't read. So John the Savage, he ends up, talking to the chief of the different, I don't know, I think there's like maybe various worlds or tribes or something, and they're all kind of the same, but they never really interact and they're never at war. But I think that there's like regions, I guess, maybe. There's like 12 regions. And so there's this guy who I think is named Mustafa. I don't know. I can't find it. But anyway, so he has a library of books that he has sort of kept, like a literary vault. And John is amazed by it. And he's like, why don't you let people read? And it's like, you have to sacrifice certain things to be happy. Everyone's happy, and it's true. Everyone is happy. Maybe some people shouldn't be happy, but they are programmed to be happy anyway. So John the Savage, after getting taken to this place, he goes to this, their entertainment is called the Feelies, where you go to this theater and you sit in a chair and you're like hooked up to sensors, and it feels like someone's kissing you or caressing you, or you're flying or whatever. It's like virtual reality. And that's kind of, interesting. And you take some soma to heighten the experience. But he basically, John the Savage doesn't like it. So he's like, you know what? I just need to go on and live on the edge. I need to live off-grid, I think it's called, and I just want to go. So he picks a place, and he's really concerned with being corrupted by this colonized world as well. So he wants to go and like just be like self-sustaining, but people end up from the colonized world going to see him and try to spy on him and interview him, even though he becomes kind of belligerent and kind of savage in a way. And he becomes a spectacle. Like there's this one director, producer who records like the audio from one of his encounters, his conflicts with John the Savage, and makes it into a feely performance that people go to see. And John ends up committing suicide by hanging himself. So, he doesn't survive either. And I think the message for both of these. But anyway, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek that I'm saying that I want to stay in this dystopia. But, if I have to, I guess, be in a world where I'm suffering, I don't want to know that I'm suffering, right? It's all in your head. So, and, I don't know. Soma doesn't sound bad. And no one really suffers except John the Savage, who, again, lived most of his life not in this dystopia, and he wasn't conditioned. So, if you are not conditioned, you are not going to be happy. You don't have ignorance, so you won't have bliss. And, because Winston kind of just became a shell of the man he used to be, and because Bernard Marx gave up and didn't really fight, and John the Savage hung himself, it seems like the authors very much want their books to be a warning. And it's interesting because you'd think that, everyone has kind of maybe an idea of how to liberate themselves or save people from a dystopia. But I guess the ultimate warning is that, no one can survive, so don't let it happen. But anyway, so I see Orwell's being kind of a setting being very realistic, very kind of gritty. It just seems like earth and dirt and, flesh and blood people. But Huxley's feels like the Jetsons. It feels like both in 1950, well, I guess, the Jetsons is also, I don't know when it was created, but, it was back in the day, right? So it's not very timely because you think that it can't really happen, even though we know more about genetics now and we have factories instead of farms and whatever. But I would say it just doesn't have the the best impact. I mean, honestly, it doesn't sound super bad to me. So Orwell's 1984 scared me. Huxley's, I just read it because I thought I should, and I'm glad I did, because now I know what it's about when people refer to it. But I don't know. He didn't make it seem as haunting as I guess it should have been. The message didn't get relayed to me. So anyway, so that's the comparison. That is what I have to say on these two books. There are many other works of dystopia out there. I'm not sure I'm really going to read them anytime soon because I have a long list of books to read. So, so that's pretty much it. Well, I will catch you all next time. Leave me some comments or send me some messages if you've read both 1984 and Huxley's Brave New World and have a different thought or more to add.